Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Women's Voices and our Lunch and Learn program with State Senator Brian Williams. We are so glad that you could join us today on this cold and bright Friday afternoon. Women's Voices started doing Lunch and Learn programs about 3 years ago because we realized that there was so much that we needed to learn that we could not possibly cover just doing a once a month evening program. And so I think we've been doing these on an almost monthly basis for about 3 years. And we're going to tackle the subject today of Senator Brian Williams' comprehensive policing reform plan for Missouri. And I know that he will have a lot to talk to us about because there's a lot of reform that needs to happen in the state of Missouri. So I'm going to turn it over to Ann Litwin, who will introduce Senator Williams. And on behalf of everybody in Women's Voices, I just want to say thank you for joining us today. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you, Barbara, and welcome, Senator Williams. We're really thrilled that you could join us today. Senator Williams represents District 14 in the Missouri State Legislature and Missouri Senate. And we're delighted to have this chance to hear from you today, Senator, about the policing reform and accountability bills that you have introduced in the State Senate, which we know are in the process of transforming and merging and all sorts of things in the legislative process. But we look forward to hearing from you about what's happening with those bills, and as well as other issues that you think are important for our city and state to deal with. Let me just give you a little bit of background on the senator. So as the oldest child of a single mother, Senator Williams learned firsthand that life does not always guarantee a fair shake. However, he knew that everybody should have access to a quality life. Williams grew up in a labor union family that instilled the importance of hard work and investing in the community. This spurred his dedication to public service and community leadership. Senator Williams grew up in Ferguson. He encountered its police department well before it became known around the world for the killing of Michael Brown and the practices that led to a Department of Justice consent decree. Studying government and public health policy at Southeastern Missouri University and Washington University inspired Williams to pursue a career in public service. As a congressional staffer for U.S. Representative William Lacey Clay, he honed his skills in strategic planning, coalition building, and bringing resources to the community. He met many residents throughout his career, listened to their stories, and found solutions for their concerns. In 2018, after working for Congressman Clay, he became the first Black man elected to the Missouri Senate in 20 years. Now, in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis and the demands for justice around the globe, Senator Williams is pushing for police reform and accountability. He filed the 2021 Policing Reform Plan with the Missouri State Senate, as Barbara mentioned, a comprehensive bill that was intended to increase public safety and build trust between the police and the community. The bill has bipartisan support, including numerous law enforcement groups and police union leaders. And we know that a pared down version was passed out of committee earlier this month, and that it is going through the transformation process as it moves through not only the Senate, but now a version in the House. And so we realize there's been a lot of movement on these bills, and we look forward to getting an update from you, Senator, on sort of where they are and how what support you could use from us as well. I would like to ask our audience to please put any questions you may have for Senator Williams in the chat as we go along. And after his presentation, we will do our best to get some responses to your questions. So, but please, as you go along and they're on your mind, type them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. Thank you. And now, Senator Williams, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ann, so much. And, I want to take time to thank Women's Voices for not only the work that you've done for the past 3 years, but beyond that, I see so many of my friends on the call. Mary, Barbara, thank you all for your leadership. And then I just see other folks I'm just proud to be able to represent in the Missouri Senate. As this journey been for me, as I think about police reform, when I was elected to the Missouri Senate, I was the first Black man to be there in 2 decades. So I felt it was extremely important to really talk about issues that not only impact our community, but also issues that I have a personal connection to. I remember as a kid growing up with a single mom in Ferguson. And my mom, one of those women voices that was raised this week to shovel and make sure her driveway is clear of snow. So, so that voice remains heard in my life today. But she always taught me to get in the game and get off the sideline. And that was my reason for running for office. I grew up competing in robotics, so I thought I would build planes and fly them. I never thought for 1 second I would be a state senator. But I knew it was important to do what I could, where I could, and be consistent in that. One thing we know in our communities is that the men and women of law enforcement, they do risk their lives each and every day. And they need to deserve to know that we're doing everything we can to protect the integrity of the profession. And one of the most important things that we can do is make sure our streets are safer by improving the relationship between police officers and the communities that they serve. The issues of public safety and police reform are among my highest priorities. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss them with you today. They focus on common sense reforms like banning chokeholds, making sure that police officers are not engaging in any level of misconduct or sexual misconduct when arresting or detaining or someone that may be held within a correctional facility. If they were to do that, they would be charged with a Class C felony. It also will ensure that bad police officers aren't department hopping. In my Senate district, I represent 35 municipalities, which goes from communities like Clayton, University City, where I live, Ladue, and then it also has communities like Ferguson, where I grew up, Kinloch, Berkeley, a very diverse district. And a lot of those municipalities have police departments. What this bill would do is provide a level of immunity to police chiefs and police officers to be able to disclose misconduct of officers without worried about maybe a police officers association suing them, or there potentially being some type of legal consequence for outing someone who should not be policing our communities at all. One way that we can improve police community relations and restore that trust is by making sure that public safety is at the center of what we do, not only at the Missouri legislature, but in government as a whole. But let me be clear about something. This isn't an us versus them situation. These are simple but important reforms that are embraced by law enforcement agencies across the country. And they've also received bipartisan support right here in the state of Missouri. There's a backstory that I kind of want to touch on to give you some context on how we got to where we are today. Outside of just having a personal connection to the challenges of being a Black person in a community with police departments that are built and sometimes have not been eradicated of systemic racism, I understood immediately that George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Michael Brown, they should all be alive today. And if I take off my lapel pin, I'm no different. And I knew it was really important to really make sure that these issues got across the finish line. Last year during a special session, I called Governor Parson and I asked him to focus on police reform during a special session where he wanted to address violent crime in the city of St. Louis. The governor decided not to expand that call, but in the process, we still did things like expanded police residency in the city of St. Louis and some other things that he felt would address violent crime. Personally, I felt would only solidify his political agenda towards his election. We agreed, and there was a commitment that I made not only to all of you, but I also demanded of my colleagues in the Missouri Senate was anything we talk about around policing, these reforms need to be front and center, and we need to make sure that it's at the top of our conversation this session. So January came around. Clearly, I spent the last 9 months going throughout the entire state of Missouri, whether it's Columbia, Springfield, Jefferson City, Kansas City, Cape Girardeau, and then clearly here in St. Louis, talking to community activists, ACLU, members of law enforcement, Sheriff's Association, Highway Patrol. And I said, hey, how do we have a serious conversation about getting police reform done in our state? We need to tackle a subculture of bad police officers that have tainted the profession and ultimately have created a level of distrust in our community that's not going to allow us to drive down crime, and it's only going to create more of a division where folks who are living in a community are afraid that they may potentially become criminals in the process of trying to expose bad actors in the community to law enforcement. So they listened, and we took this issue up. It had a hearing. It came through the Judiciary Committee. Clearly, Senate Bill 60 had a lot more reforms. It addressed things like no-knock arrest warrants, de-escalation training. It also had language that would deal with civilian arrest, as we saw with the Central West End, with the McCloskey family. We don't want civilians taking action into their own hands. We want to allow law enforcement to come into as safe of an environment as possible and not have to walk into situations that are already dangerous. We saw what happened in Georgia with Ahmaud Arbery. He should be alive today. Whether someone was under the suspicion that he committed a crime or not, that a civilian should not be the person that take those things into their own hands. We have law enforcement. We have a court system that has been designated to handle those type of things. So it would address that. But also, we want to make sure that police officers are also not using their power to coerce folks into doing things that we know are inappropriate. Look what's happening downtown in the St. Louis City Justice Center. If there are any members of the correctional facility that are engaging in any level of misconduct, now there's been stories, and those are to be verified and determined whether or not they're true. But if those things are true, that they are forcing inmates to fight each other and engaging in sexual misconduct and forcing inmates to do things that are inappropriate, those officers would be charged with a Class C felony. And that's one example of many why we need to focus on police reform in this state and why it's important to get it done now. Meanwhile, we have to also understand that there's a serious issue when it comes to how we police our communities when it comes to just building that trust. We want to allow police officers to have discretion when it comes to a bench warrant. We've seen that there's been municipalities that have used folks as personal ATMs by giving them traffic citations. If you drive up I-170 through the middle of my Senate district, you're going to go through 25, roughly 30 municipalities within a 20-mile radius. So that means that you can get up to 20 citations potentially from different police departments. And these are folks who are getting pulled over for maybe a tail light being out or expired license plates. And usually people that are in those situations is because they're unable to pay. So giving them a citation with a hefty fine does not make their situation any better. And it does not put them in a position to be able to handle it. So we want to give officers discretion. If you get pulled over and you have your young child in the car, let's give them another court date and give them an opportunity and more time to take care of that traffic citation than sending them to jail and then potentially missing work and being bounced around from municipality to municipality. Those are one example on how Senate Bill 60 can help build that trust. We're navigating through the system now. The bill has been put on the formal calendar, which any day now it can go before the Missouri Senate. As you know, it's a very challenging process, especially in a Republican-led majority. But we've been working as hard as we possibly can. We've been meeting with everyone, meeting folks where they are, really talking to folks about what this bill does. And truly, I believe that it also sets precedent at the state level to really apply pressure and accountability for our local police departments. As we've seen, the St. Louis County Council just passed a resolution in support of Senate Bill 60. So that's just one example on how various levels of government are paying attention to what we're doing. And they recognize that these are reforms that need to happen, and we need to make sure that they're implemented immediately in our police department. So I think that it creates such a larger conversation. I think they're great reforms. This is the first time that we've had reforms of this magnitude since the death of Michael Brown, since the release of the Ferguson Commission report. And we got to get them across the finish line. With that, I'll be more than happy to have a conversation and take some questions.
Thanks, Senator Williams. My name's Nancy Nix Rice, and I am just coordinating the questions for you that are in the chat.
Okay.
The first one is asking about the level of support for these reforms among the mayoral candidates in the city of St. Louis. And obviously they're not voting, but certainly they have an outsized voice in some circles. Comments?
Well, I wrote an op-ed probably maybe a couple weeks ago, and it wasn't just solely about policing. It was about the importance of city-county relations. And I said that St. Louis County residents do not have a vote on who the next mayor is in the city of St. Louis, but we need to know that they are paying attention to the challenges in the region and actually take a regional approach to their leadership. And I use something that's symbolic right in the center of my district, and that's Washington Park Cemetery, which is a historic Black cemetery that was wiped out due to the expansion of the airport. To the extent that they were digging up bodies and just disposing them. There was no record keeping. Descendants today still have a difficult time finding their loved ones. And we've been able to identify some of those folks, and we're in the process of getting this cemetery cleaned up. But that's just one symbolic example on how predominantly Black communities have been wiped out due to a failed airport expansion. And the city still owns parcels that have become illegal dumping sites. And I said, we need to know from the next mayor what city-county relations is going to look like, where we have candidates that are familiar with the challenges of the region, and ultimately it's going to govern as such. And I would hope that police reform is at the center of that.
Gwen raised the question about how police officers are prepared to handle any mental health issues, what training is offered around that, and if that's impacted by your bills.
So we have to take one step at a time, and wraparound services is very important. I serve as a board director for People's Health Center, and I was very instrumental in getting a behavioral health center for children, the first of its kind in the city of St. Louis, where we focused on the importance of not only behavior and mental health, but removing the stigma and ensuring that healthcare professionals are culturally competent. That would be something that we want to focus on down the road, is that those wraparound services are available to officers, because as we know, it's a high stress job and they have to make very difficult decisions in the spare of a moment. So we do want to make sure that services are available. We're addressing various levels of trauma that may be impacted through the profession or maybe prior to becoming a police officer, and then make sure that those services are available to families as well. But we have to start somewhere, and I'm hoping to get these reforms across the finish line and clearly come back and handle more reforms as we move forward.
So Mary Schumann actually has a multi-layered question here, so I'll break it up. First, she makes reference to the sometimes sense of futility in moving this sort of legislation through Jeff City. And so why should we expect this to be any different? What have you done to engender bipartisan support around this? What's keeping the law and order contingent aligned with intelligent reform? How are you managing to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for it. Well, we did something that was very unique. We not only built a strategic coalition, but as I stated before, we spent the past 9 months since last session working on this, meeting people where they are, traveling all over the state, talking to law enforcement, talking to activists, talking to social justice groups, working with organizations like the ACLU, Empower Missouri, the list goes on. But we also took time to meet with fellow colleagues in the Missouri Senate and House to think that Senate Bill 60 not only has been testified in favor of by law enforcement, but this was one of the first bills to be that came up in a committee hearing in a Republican legislature sponsored by a Democrat, and to think that that bill is on the formal calendar to go before the body any day now is probably the most progress around a police reform bill in the history of the state. Secondly, we've been able to really build true bipartisan support, to think that there are House bills in the lower chamber that have been filed by Representative Rasheen Aldridge, as well as Representative Shamed Dogan, one Democrat, one Republican, who have taken Senate Bill 60 and broke it up into various pieces of legislation. That's a testament to how hard we've worked and the coalition we've been able to build around it. Has it been easy? No. But, when I ran for state senate, I ran primarily on a platform that I was sick and tired of Democrats and Republicans going back home saying we can't work with each other when everyday folks have to work with people they don't like and still get a job done. And politics and government should be no different. If you go to work and you don't like someone, and you don't work with that person, you're going to get fired. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to go to work and work with people we don't agree with or may not share the same life experiences and be able to come to some agreement to ultimately move our state forward. The House bills, none of them have made it as far as the Senate bill. I think Shamed Dogan's bill just got a hearing on Thursday. And Rasheen Aldridge bill has not come up in the House for a hearing. The only bill that has been voted out of committee and put on the formal calendar to go before the body is Senate Bill 60, and that's the bill I filed.
Another part of Mary's question was about the potential for women's voices focusing some portion of our advocacy efforts on local reforms. And she was curious what you've experienced with local police departments and municipalities about their receptivity to these ideas.
Yeah, so as I stated before, the St. Louis County Council passed out a unanimous resolution in support of Senate Bill 60. So all members of the county council agreed that this is good policy, and hopefully that it sets precedent on how we move forward with local police departments. I've been in several conversations with St. Louis City Police Chief John Hayden, and he's committed to me that he's in full support of Senate Bill 60. Also sent a letter in support of Senate Bill 60, and said that he would do everything he can to ensure that the police department moves forward as well in his capacity. The other side to it is that I'm very concerned with what's happening locally with our police department. I mean, we're talking about some unprecedented situations. I mean, when it comes to no-knock arrest warrants, to think that there was a woman whose dog was shot and killed due to a no-knock arrest warrant for an unpaid utility bill, or to think that we're in the middle of a discrimination case for someone because of their sexual identity, and now someone because of their race, and a promise to become the police chief. So we've seen some really unprecedented levels of corruption that bothers me. And I'm going to be just as committed to working with local law enforcement and leaders to make sure that there are accountability measures in our local police departments, and that we are recognizing that we should be policing our communities with trust, and that Black lives do matter.
Thanks. Next question in the chat is a question: how is the CIT program going? And if you want to explain what that is first.
Okay, I'm not 100% sure what that is. Who asked that question?
Okay, that's from Lynn. Lynn, do you want to unmute and explain a little more about what you're asking here? Because I didn't know either, and I was trying to bluff my way through that.
Now, and got it.
Oh,
Now,
I'm
keep
sorry,
in mind, I'm, as a state senator, one of the qualifications is still learning too. So, I'm not a genius, neither do I play one on television.
Well, it's hard to figure out just from the initials, but I think it stands for Crisis Intervention Team.
Okay.
It's training that the policemen go on. And so if there is a mental health crisis, you ask for a CIT trained officer
Yes.
to respond. So I didn't know if that program has been effective so far, if you have any idea.
So I've spoken with folks, and we've got mixed results or mixed feelings about it. Some people feel that it's good, some feel that it is not, and that's something that we have to focus on. But I haven't spent an extensive amount of time in that capacity to speak to it from an educated space.
So there are a couple of questions about the status of the bills in the House and ways that we can stay informed about that. And sort of piggybacking onto that, to what extent are those committee hearings being transparently made available for the public to observe and to comment?
Yeah, so if you look in the chat, Robert Arbuthnot from my staff, if you submit your email address to him, and his email should be in the chat, we'll make sure that we keep real-time updates on what's happening in the legislature, whether it's in the House or Senate with the bills, so folks could know when to check in and when to pay attention to the various movements of those bills. As I stated earlier, Representative Dogan's bill had a hearing on Thursday. That bill has not been voted out of committee, so we still have to wait and see, what movement that bill gets and whether or not it goes before the body. But it still goes back to just a testament on where we are in the Senate, to think that even Representative Dogan, as a fellow Republican, is working through the challenges in the lower chamber. To think that we've gotten this bill out of committee and on a formal calendar, it's tough, but we're really optimistic on where our bill is, and clearly, their bills are split up with various pieces of reforms from Senate Bill 60. So clearly, if we get Senate Bill 60 across the finish line, that will address the reforms that they're pushing for as well.
So in our individual advocacy work, we typically, I think, tend to think that our own particular elective representatives are the places where we could have the most influence. But do you feel that it's worthwhile to reach out to committee members who are involved in the decisions about whether to move a proposal to the next level, even if they're not our representative?
Well, informing folks and letting your elected officials know where you stand on issues is very important. But we can't dismiss the fact that these conversations are so powerful, because we all go back to our social networks and our friends and various groups that we're affiliated with, and we talk about what these things do. And even folks who engage with members of law enforcement. My uncle, who drives me here locally, he retired after serving 27 years at the St. Louis City Police Department. He had every intention of serving 30 years, but my family was so concerned about whether or not he would make it home at night. My aunt was just like, you need to retire now because it's just too stressful. So it's not lost upon me that it's a high stress, very difficult job. So informing even members of law enforcement on the ground what these reforms do and how these reforms are just as committed to making their job safer as it is to building the trust is very important. And being able to hear from people they trust and folks that are in their social networks is very, very powerful.
Do you want to talk a little bit in more specific terms about how these proposals benefit individuals in law enforcement? Because I think you have an audience here of people who are not the least bit shy about speaking up to the people in their circles. And the more informed we can be when we speak up, obviously, the better. So what are our key talking points about why this is good for law enforcement too?
Well, you know, if you think about just some of the things where you get immunity to keep police officers from bouncing from department to department. You know, there's a lot of police officers that see their colleagues in any profession that are doing the wrong thing, and they're concerned that there may be some type of consequence or a backlash for disclosing that. So to know that they won't lose their job or they won't be sued or the Police Officers Association won't come after them from disclosing behavior of a bad officer, that helps the profession. To also think that as a police chief, I had this conversation with Chief Armstrong, the police chief of Ferguson, and he said, you know, Brian, if a police officer was to leave the department in the middle of an investigation, the only thing that I could disclose technically is the day they started and the day that they left the department. So that means that this officer can go over to another municipality or another police department, and whether they were under investigation or whether or not they were being reprimanded for something would not be disclosed. And to think that now police chiefs can have those open conversations and know that they have some level of immunity is very, very important. We also have some other reforms that we're going to be focusing on, which is going to be a Rat Back program, which was discussed with the Missouri Highway Patrol, which basically is similar to what we do with educators. When a teacher is looking to get a job in another school district, they do a background check to see if they have any type of convictions or charges in other states. This bill would also include language to address that. So now if someone was to go to another police department, they have 30 days where they can go and do a background check and see if this officer has been fired or been charged or been reprimanded in another state or in another municipality for misconduct before they're hired onto that department. Another important piece is that discretion piece. Being able to, you pull over a single mom and she has her child in the back seat and she's trying to get home or trying to get to the store to get food or whatever the case may be, to not have to arrest her for having a bench warrant for traffic citation or a tail light being out. They could give her another court date and let her go on her way. Not only does it not inconvenience that single mom, but it also helps her build that trust. And then it also allows that officer to actually humanize that situation and not feel like they're going to be, there's going to be some type of steps taken against them for not arresting that person or not following what the technical protocol would be for someone having a warrant. So I think it does a lot of good things to ultimately build that trust and also make policing easier.
Thanks. That's super helpful talking points. Barb Finch wanted to know what actions we can take individually and as an organization to help people wrap their heads around the idea that equitable public safety is not the same as reducing crime.
Yeah, so one, they're very different, but they also work hand in hand. I mean, if you think about it, you know, I'm strongly opposed to putting more guns on the streets. I think we need to do something about addressing gun violence and making our streets safer. That's why I advocate for groups like Mom Demand. That's why I'm proud of my voting record against allowing guns on public transportation and fighting against any policies that would put more guns on the street and not keep them confined to people who are either trained to use them or have some type of conceal and carry permit. You know, they're very different. And as you saw with the McCloskey situation, have we had civilian arrest addressed, and folks in the community don't feel like they have to extend the scope of the council doctrine to the public streets of their home and point a gun at peaceful protesters, that could have easily turned into a violent situation. To think that someone was pointing an assault rifle at a peaceful protester. And then to think if law enforcement was to come and intervene in that and someone end up getting killed, even that officer. These are levels of how potential gun violence can be prevented by having common sense police reforms in place, where we're not operating. If you look at the state law in Missouri, it's almost written as if we don't have an organized and sophisticated police department. So to think if we start putting more responsibility and accountability on police officers and not empowering civilians to take almost vigilante approaches to how we engage with each other or certain situations that's not involving someone having a direct attack on them in their home, or someone or leaving all of this discretion between what a threat is and what a threat isn't, we're going to continue to have so many different cases of gun violence rising. And we want to eliminate guns off our streets and make sure guns are in the hands of the right people and not in the hands of the wrong. Barb, I hope I answered that question.
So I have a question personally. There was a letter to the editor in either today's or maybe yesterday's Post-Dispatch that was about an inch long of print. And what it says was, if you don't like the conditions in the jail, then just don't break the law. I think that's probably a little bit simplistic, and wondered if you had some comments about how people might end up in a local jail situation before we are certain that they broke any laws.
Well, yeah, I mean, we have several examples and precedent of folks who have been put in situations just because of the color of their skin, or you know, the list goes on. You know, I'll tell you a story about a young man who grew up in Ferguson, and he was home from college, first Christmas break home, 19 years old, driving to one of his friends' house, has a buddy in the car with him. You know, two young men of color got pulled over in North St. Louis County, and the officers handcuffed them in the freezing cold, made them take off their coats, handcuffed them on the sidewalk while they went through their vehicle to not find anything, but to also really demoralize them and make them feel as if they committed a crime when the only thing they did wrong was driving while Black. One of those young people went off and went to college and did a couple other things and understood that they are bad cops that discriminate and make bad decisions, and then eventually went off and became a state senator, and now is focusing on police reform. So, you know, there's so many reasons to be against law enforcement, but I made a conscious decision to support law enforcement by putting in reforms to get rid of bad ones and make sure that we keep good ones in place. So there's a lot of people that are viewed as criminals because of how they look and have never committed a crime in their life. And some even go further and may end up in local jail. And you know, we do have folks who do commit crimes, but that shouldn't be a death wish either. And that's why I'm focusing on expungement for people who do make mistakes and make sure it doesn't follow them for the rest of their lives. So this is a very comprehensive thing. You know, police reform is a very big piece to an even bigger picture. So we have to start somewhere, and we have to create a foundation that's really built on trust, and then it allows us to be able to look at our communities through an equitable lens. And it all starts with common sense reform. So that's why we're doing this. And I'm confident there's been people who have been in local jail because of circumstantial things that they couldn't control, and it's been people that's been put in there just because of situations of discrimination. And all of them matter, and we need to make sure that we're promoting people going and being quality citizens and not promoting crowding our jails and prisons.
Well, a special thank you for that. as advocates, we are often told that the most effective way to make our points with leaders that we're speaking with is with the power of a story. And I have to say that was about one shining example of an impactful story. And I hope that your fellow senators and that the lawmakers in the lower chambers as well have a chance to hear it and really understand the impact of the work that you're doing. That was awesome.
Thank you. And if you look in the chat, Nancy, or tell everyone that's listening, Rob from my staff is putting in videos and different things where we got responses from the governor about this bill. We have colleagues and various people from both parties talking about the bill and why it would be good for the state. And even my story that I've shared, which is a personal one, but I believe is very compelling to why we need to have police reform in our state.
Absolutely, absolutely. So another question, not surprisingly, being an action-focused group, is what steps would you suggest that we would be able to take, again, both as individuals and as an organization, to support the work that you're doing?
Well, when Mary reached out, it was a no-brainer, and I've done several of these, and it's been with, sometimes 100 people, sometimes 10 people, and it's been so beneficial for me to be able to talk about these reforms, but continue to keep people engaged. When I tell you this is going to require all hands on deck, I'm going to need every single one of you to be involved in this process because it impacts every single one of us. And the more that we talk about it, the more opportunities to get in front of groups and talk about it, your friends, your neighbors. It continues to inform us, and it continues to really spark a conversation. We've been able to go on so many different platforms and talk about police reform, but we're talking about it from a very different perspective. This isn't about pointing the finger at one side. This is about saying, hey, if we don't come together and work together to start making our community safer and building the trust, it's only going to make your job harder, and we're going to continue to lose lives in the process. So at some point, we have to come together and understand that enough is enough. And that's where I'm at. And don't feel bad for me as a Democrat in the minority, because I give Republicans hell too. So, it's not always a good day when I'm walking down the hallway.
Mary Schuman asked about a number of awful bills that have been introduced, sort of the flip side of the good policies that you're suggesting. She specifically mentions one that makes protesting a felony, and another one that allows deadly force to be used against peaceful protesters. Any comments?
Yeah, I have several.
Thought you might.
One, the senator who sponsored the bill that would first, let's talk about the one. It's a couple crazy ones, so let's create distinction for them. So one is would focus on would allow someone to be able to run over a protester if they felt like they were threatening or potentially blocking the street or highway. Not only did I talk with that senator and expressed how offensive it is, we also got that language, running over a protester, and the vigilante language, removed from that bill. So that no longer exists in that bill, even though it's still a terrible bill. Then there's also the bill that focuses on the Police Bill of Rights, which is a police union bill. And one of my colleagues from St. Charles decided to add language that would make it a felony, a Class E, first a misdemeanor, then a Class E felony if you were to block a street or a highway peacefully protesting. And I'm strongly opposed to it. I have made that very clear to him, as well as anyone else who thinks it's okay to do that. And I will do everything in my power to make sure none of these policies go into law, and they are not mutually exclusive to what we're doing with police reform.
Before I share the next question, I would just mention to everyone who's on the call today that if you are not following the comments and the references in the chat, you really want to do so, because a number of people are not asking questions, but sharing information, and the senator's staff, as well as others, are sharing links and additional resources there. So by all means, capture those.
Yes, and Rob's going to answer as many questions as possible. So please look in the chat, because he's providing very valuable information.
So a background check on police officers going to new communities seems like such common sense. The same as freedom to report inappropriate activities without retribution. Other professions have done this for years.
Mm-hmm.
Comments?
Yeah, it's very important. And the Rat Back program was actually brought to our attention by the Missouri State Highway Patrol. They said it would make their job easier.
That's a pretty powerful testimonial.
So Director Sandy Karsten called me one day and talked to me about it. And I said, I really like this. And she said, you know, Senator, if you could put that in there, that'll be such a game changer. And they testified in favor of the Rat Back program. And as crazy as it sounds, that language in that bill was actually sponsored by Justin Brown, a Republican from Rolla, who actually thought that it would be good because of situations they've seen with the sheriff's departments.
Sorry, I'm trying to read and be a gracious hostess at the same time. Again, lots of interesting comments in the chat, as well as questions. How are rural communities responding to this proposed legislation? How do sheriff's organizations, for instance, view it, and is their lens different from that of people involved in urban policing?
Well, you know, so we've done a lot of extensive research. So we started looking up cases in rural parts of the state where you may not have seen situations necessarily as common in terms of police brutality, but there are people of color and people that come from families where their last name has been historically known or perceived as troublemakers, where the sheriff department have targeted those folks. And the Sheriff's Association has testified in support of our reforms. You know, if you go to communities like Hayti and Caruthersville, they have a large population of people of color, which I've visited with. And they've expressed very serious concerns of how law enforcement have treated them in what would be considered and is the one of the poorest parts of the state. The poverty level exceeds the poorest community in the city of St. Louis. So, you know, folks are dealing with these issues all over the state, and they recognize it's an issue. I've talked with colleagues who have had situations where elected sheriffs have targeted them for political reasons. And it's been situations that are, you know, unethical and should not happen. So we've seen shortcomings in law enforcement in so many different capacities, and the scope is slightly unprecedented. It's just unfortunate that you know we have situations where folks have lost their lives, in particular Black people. So you know it's a serious issue, and we're grateful to have worked through the channels with law enforcement groups for them to see that this is a real issue, and give them the confidence that we're coming in good faith to get this done, and it's not about, you know, really exposing the profession, but exposing the subculture of bad folks that have tainted the profession.
Thanks. It was just pointed out to me in the chat that because I had my screen in speaker view, I didn't see that Erica Williams had her hand raised with an additional question or comment. Erica, do you want to unmute and have the floor for a minute here?
Oh, hi, sure. Oh, hello, everyone. Hello, Senator Williams.
Yeah, my
I
constituent.
just had a quick question. If there was a companion House bill to the Senate bill,
Yeah,
did you hear me?
I did hear you. So we don't have a companion bill in the House because they took Senate Bill 60 and they broke them up in various House bills. But we do have to find a House handler for the Senate bill, and we're working through that now.
Okay. I'm
Tell
trying
you.
to is there someone I can.
Well, I'll keep you in the loop, but we have to find a bill handler, and we're working through that now. And then clearly we have to find an ideal committee that we want that bill referred to, which has a chairman that's thoughtful to police reform and could articulate what the reforms are and ultimately be able to educate the committee.
Okay,
So
sounds
we're
good.
working through it. But I'll keep you in the loop. Tell the
Always
boys I
good
say
seeing
hi.
you.
Tell your mom I say hi as well.
I will. Oh, and happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness, you guys, this is so St. Louis. What can we say? There's also some conversation in the chat about the lifelong impact on an individual of having been incarcerated, and particularly with a felony conviction. Does your bill do anything to ameliorate that situation? And if not, or even if it does, is that part of phase 2 or phase 3 of this sort of reform as you're proposing it or supporting it?
Yeah, so we actually have another bill that we filed that would address that. So going forward, we know it's important to keep our community safer and stronger. So we got to make sure that people who serve their time can find a good job and a good wage as they re-enter society. So we sponsored legislation as well, expunging nonviolent criminal records easier. So basically what this bill would do, and we're hoping that this bill gets a hearing here within the next few weeks. It will allow information from the Missouri Central Repository to be made available to expungement clinics or legal aid organizations. So, for example, Washington University School of Law, St. Louis University School of Law, UMKC, University of Missouri Columbia. They can all have access to this as well as legal services. And it would lower the expungement surcharge amount from $250 to $100, but also waive the surcharge, allow the judge to waive the surcharge if the petitioner is found to be unable to pay the cost. It would also lower the earliest time to request an expungement from 7 years to 18 months. And then it also has some other provisions that would streamline the process so it can help people who basically paid their debt to society, ultimately find a good paying job and rebuild their lives.
And what's the current standard in Missouri about formerly incarcerated folks getting their voting rights reinstated?
Yeah, so they would have to be removed from supervised release.
Okay, so once their
Probation or
parole is completed, then they can get that reinstated?
Correct.
Thanks for clarifying that.
And with this
I'll
expungement,
add something real quick to that.
I'm sorry.
They do have to be off. They have to actually go re-register to vote. It doesn't happen automatically.
Right. And what this expungement bill would do also is it lowers the time to get your record expunged. So usually it would say 7 years in law today, but we want to lower that to 18 months. And as you know, 7 years is a very long time to be unemployed or in a position where you can't get quality employment.
Sorry, just some really amazing comments in the
Yeah,
chat.
so I saw that question too. So Barb, basically, so the expensive part about getting an expungement is one, this bill does a couple things. It gives judges first cover. And as we all know, judges usually have the desire to be appointed or reappointed to various benches, or someone looking to acquire a judgeship. They become very conservative with expungements. So now that we have this law, it allows them to expunge records without thinking it's going to have some type of political or moral consequence when it comes to getting appointments, because the governor ultimately appoints judges. The other side of it, which is very important, is that if you were to apply for an expungement, you would have to, one, get a lawyer, which would be very expensive because it's a civil suit. So you would sue the arresting agency, and then they would have to show up and they would provide the evidence that they have. You would provide your side, and the judge would ultimately decide whether or not that record is eligible or worthy of being expunged. Now that we have a law in place, what it would do is it cuts down, that process of having to get a lawyer. Now you can go to an expungement clinic. You can have someone help you complete the petition. And we're going to start doing expungement clinics and hopefully be able to do them sooner once folks, we don't have to socially distance as much. And you could go work with the law clinic, have a supervising attorney with law students help you complete that petition. And now you're just paying that $200 fee instead of having to get an attorney to go and file that petition and ultimately sue the municipality that you were arrested in, or the arresting agency. So it cuts down a lot of red tape and it saves you a tremendous amount of money. But it also would give the judge discretion, if you're unable to pay, to waive that petition surcharge, which now is $200.
Thank you so much for all that clarification. I just have one last personal question. It seems to me like I see your name for speaking everywhere. How many more of these are you doing today before you get a good night's sleep?
Well, I'll tell you what, I have one at once. I have to jump off here like now in a second. But it's going to be actually talking about COVID-19 vaccines and mass distribution. But, when I tell you, and a lot of folks in here know me, a lot of folks have, we've had the opportunity to meet each other. I'm committed to our community. I'm committed to our region and our state. And it's folks that have known me since I was a kid. And, it's a true honor to serve the state. And I'm a very hopeful person. Bad policies and disagreements do concern me, but it's hard to squeeze the hope out of me. And I believe we'll get this bill across the finish line. And I think it'll set precedent for us to really move our state in the right direction. And, I'll end on this. First, I want to thank you all for your time and your questions. They were great. But also just know that sometimes our country and our community, it seems deeply divided, especially after a major election. And I know that, there's more that unites us than divides us. And as a state senator, I'm proud to represent every single one of you, and not just people who voted for me. So I hope that other leaders feel the same and recognize that public safety, police reform, building a community around equity and ensuring that everyone has a fair chance should not be partisan issues, and they should be common goals. And that's what I focus on. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to serve you all and have an opportunity to talk about these policies.
Well, we're certainly grateful for your work on this bill and for your willingness to come and speak to us and to so many other groups. And on behalf of Women's Voices, we're also gratified to have not only so many people on the call, but so much engagement, so many good questions and comments. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and then let's get busy and go to work helping get this across the finish line. And
if you ever need anything, please reach out to our office, and any opportunities to talk about police reform or how we work together to make things better, just let me know.
Good job.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.